Hello, and welcome to Namio's Corner, where we explore the best, the worst, and the incredibly mediocre in religious art and culture. If there's one thing that almost all religious movies pride themselves on, it's being family-friendly. While some religious films target adults or teenagers, the majority are marketed towards parents with young children and aim for a G or PG rating. This puts them in good company because neither religious films nor family films are generally known for being high quality. Let's face it, for every Toy Story or Shrek 2, there are 1,000 Baby Geniuses 2 or Land Before Time sequels. Similarly, when it comes to religious films, for every Courageous or Brigham City, there are a dozen zero-budget Left Behinds or Time Changers. And this is an important distinction, because while a lack of quality creates a lack of expectations for both genres, there are far fewer religious films than there are secular family films. This opens up an opportunity for companies who know that they're either going to produce or already have produced an inferior family film. How do you make some extra money off of a generic, unremarkable, or even bad family film? You shove a couple of shallow references to God or Jesus into the script and unceremoniously drop it into Christian bookstores. That's where today's film comes in. Courage is a 2009 movie starring Jason Priestley of 90210 fame, and normally I wouldn't be reviewing it since it barely qualifies as a religious movie. But I'm making an exception for one reason. This is a survival movie that is so poorly written, I think it might be actively trying to kill its audience. The movie is a stepmom clone at heart. A very bored-looking Priestley plays Robert Childs, who is caught between his obnoxious teenage daughter Christy and his wife Teresa. Cue some bonding through difficult circumstances, and everyone winds up a happy family at the end. The biggest problem is that while the writer took pains to copy the stepmom formula, they don't seem to understand what made that movie a successful story. It made sense for Jenna Malone's character to be obnoxious and hostile in Stepmom because both her mother's death and her father's marriage were new situations. In Courage, Christy's mother has been dead for 6 years and her father has been remarried for 2, so she should have had plenty of time to adjust to the situation, meaning that her deep hostility towards Teresa, if it were believable, would be an indication of serious psychological issues necessitating professional help. But since it's not believable, the audience is stuck with a character whose motivations make no sense and who gets more annoying every second she's on screen. Robert has written a book called On Dating Brainy Women about his courtship with Teresa. This is the first of many, many times the movie will try to convince us that Teresa is intelligent. The book isn't doing well, so Robert decides to take the family on a boat trip so they can get away from it all and spend some time together. As they're cruising along, Teresa tries to teach Christy about the wonders of stock footage. Nature.
Look at that. That is a green algae called Pyrocystis luna, and it glows when it's agitated. Look at that. A timberland wolf.
But Christy is having none of it.
Think that.
Wow. Is there anything you don't know?
Yeah, like, knowing stuff is for losers, you guys. It's, like, totally not cool and stuff. But seconds later, we find out that there is something Teresa doesn't know.
What's this?
It's my lucky charm when I was a kid.
So she can recognize a random species of algae and the breed of a particular wolf from a boat, but she can't recognize a compass when it is right in front of her. Great catch you got there, Robert. But a setting this idyllic can't last for long, and Robert pops up with some bad news.
I just heard a report on the radio. There's a storm system headed this way. Shouldn't be too bad, though. They say it's a small system. We should stay close to shore, though, just to be safe. But be careful of the rocks.
All right. Aye, Captain.
I didn't edit that, by the way. That is really how they do the transition. 1 second, it's the middle of the day and there isn't a cloud in the sky, and the next, it's the middle of the night and everything has become terrible CGI. I don't think this movie understands how weather works. Or time. Robert is doing his best to pilot the boat, but Teresa sends him down to comfort Christy instead because obviously that's what's most important. Teresa turns out to be just as good at piloting the boat as she is at recognizing a compass, promptly crashing the boat into some rocks and knocking herself out in the process. Robert is thrown overboard in the crash, but washes up on shore instead of drowning due to sheer dumb luck. They pull him out of the water and discover that he's conscious but injured.
I'm getting supplies off the boat. Hypothermia will set in 3 hours.
Wait, what?
Hypothermia will set in 3 hours.
Yeah, I don't know where she got that number from, but she's an idiot. If it's cold enough out there that they're worried about hypothermia, being wet, the wind chill, and their lack of shelter is going to kill all 3 of them long before 3 hours have passed. In extreme cases, hypothermia can kill a person in under 15 minutes. And I know it has several holes in it, but it's obviously not going anywhere, so if they were that worried about hypothermia, they could have just stayed in the boat where they would have been somewhat protected from the wind. So, in the real world, our so-called brainy heroine would have just gotten at least one member of her family killed. If we're gonna start that, we should add her crashing the boat. Awesome. Rather than retreating into the trees where they might be at least a little bit protected, they decide to huddle under a single blanket on the beach because that would totally protect you from hypothermia.
Dear God, please protect us from this storm.
God, please save my dad. I'm scared.
Hey, Christian audience, we totally had our characters pray just now. See, this is totally a Christian movie. The next morning, Teresa starts trying to dry out their cell phones, proving that at the very least she's smarter than Chris was and rescued. The plan works, so who does she call? Why, her mother, of course, but the signal is way too weak and her mother can't hear her, and finally the call drops. So what does our heroine do? She gives up. That's right. Our so-called brainy leading lady doesn't even try calling 911 or the Coast Guard or anyone who, might actually be able to help. When her mother can't hear her, she puts her phone back in her pocket and forgets about it. You know who will come and help you even if they can't hear you over the phone? 911. Because if you're calling them, they assume you're in trouble. And if they can't hear you, they assume that something is preventing you from speaking to them. You know who doesn't make that assumption? Family members. And to prove my point, Teresa's mother doesn't assume anything is wrong, she just calls back and leaves a message, meaning that Teresa has now actively undermined their hopes of rescue. Elsewhere on the island, a bear wanders into a family's campsite and stands around roaring because that's all that the bear they rented was really trained to do. The mother of the family is cooking some bacon when the bear wanders in, and when she realizes it's there, she backs away slowly, still holding the food, and then takes it with her into the trailer because it's apparently more important to protect the bacon than it is her children who are in a tent out in the open. Actually, I think the internet would support that decision. Teresa finds a flare gun in their supplies, and when a plane flies overhead, she tries to use it, but it doesn't work. So, once again, she gives up. The next day, when another plane flies overhead, she sits by the fire and does nothing, despite the fact that we know she has another flare because she uses it later. Back home, Robert's publishers discover that his book is gaining in popularity, and they try to get in touch with him. When they can't reach him by phone, one of them goes to the house, where Teresa's mother tells him that she's worried that the family hasn't come back yet. They decide to go to the police, who tell them that they have to wait until the family has been missing for 48 hours before they can file a report, because this movie has no idea how reality works. 2 hunters are tracking the bear from earlier and fire some warning shots into the air to try and drive it further away from the populated area of the island. Teresa and the others hear the shots, so they start yelling for help. When they get no response, she, you guessed it, gives up. Because taking a few minutes to walk or run towards the sound in hopes of getting close enough to attract the hunter's attention would have been way too much work. The hunter's plan works, and the bear is driven away from the populated area right to where our main characters are. Christy finds the bear minding its own business and playing with a stick, so naturally, Teresa tells her to throw rocks at it. Okay, I cannot let this slide. I know that not everyone grew up in Wyoming like I did, where park rangers would occasionally come to our school to talk about wilderness safety, but the way that this movie treats bears is so inaccurate, it's dangerous. Bears are generally not dangerous to humans unless they feel threatened or those humans do something incredibly stupid. Problems most often arise when people who live near bear populations don't properly store their food and garbage. Bears are opportunistic, and if they smell an easy meal, they'll go after it. If those easy meals are in populated areas and the bear gets them often enough, that's when they start to become dangerous to people. Until that happens, while they can be dangerous, bears are like any other forest creature and will generally be more afraid of you than you are of them. When Teresa saw the bear, the best thing she could have done was tell Christy to back away from it and leave it alone. By throwing rocks at it when it wasn't even paying attention to them, all she did was make it feel threatened, which is a good way to provoke an otherwise harmless bear into attacking. She decides to use a flare to scare it off, which works and might even have worked in real life, but it's a good thing they made it CGI because shooting a real flare at the ground is a good way to start a forest fire. Teresa says that they have to leave the campsite. She says the bear is definitely going to come back because they have food, which is stupid. She doesn't know for sure that the bear smelled their food because it didn't come close enough to their camp and it didn't find any of their food. So she should have done what every park ranger tells every camper to do. Put the food high up where the bear can't reach it. If a bear can't get to your food, it will move on. If they were feeling paranoid, they could have even gone and stayed in the wrecked boat. But because Teresa is an idiot, she decides that they need to build a crude litter and drag Robert through the woods, breaking the first and most important rule of survival when you're lost in the wilderness, which is to stay where you are so that rescuers can find you. The bear happens to see them, and once again it doesn't really do anything. So, of course, the three of them freak out, and Robert tosses not only their food, but all of their supplies at the bear, ostensibly to lighten the load, but mostly because he's a moron. They come to a river, and Teresa decides that they need to cross it right now, even though the bear isn't even following them, and bears can swim, so it wouldn't help even if it was following them. Robert is strapped to the litter, so when it flips over, he can't get free in order to breathe. And rather than take 2 seconds to stop and turn him over, she demands that they keep going, preferring just to perform CPR on the other side of the river. And by CPR, I mean she vaguely pushes gently in the wrong place on his chest in a way that wouldn't do anything at all for someone who actually needed saving. Once Robert starts magically breathing again, they help him hop through the woods, which begs the question of why they didn't just have him do that in the first place, and Teresa asks Christy if she still has her cell phone. Rather than trying to use the cell phone or something equally intelligent, Teresa smashes it against a rock to get to the battery, which makes no sense since she could have just opened the back cover. Then she uses the battery to start a fire. This sounds and looks stupid, but it is a real technique. There's only one problem. In order to start a fire using a cell phone battery, you need a piece of steel wool, which Teresa doesn't have. It's also not nearly as easy to use this technique as the movie wants us to think. It takes a long time to start a fire this way, even if you have the proper materials and are using the proper technique, which Teresa isn't. So, even when the movie is trying to show us a real survival technique, they manage to get it wrong and make it look stupid in the process. Teresa's mother has been spending most of the movie wringing her hands and crying, but takes a break to do something vaguely useful. Up to this point, no one has known where the family were headed, but by coincidence, a friend of Christie's shows up and tells Teresa's mom that Christie mentioned Bear Island. Wait, it's actually called Bear Island? And most of the plot centers around people being afraid of a bear? That's some stellar writing there. She tells the police, who send people out to look for the boat. Sure enough, they find it, which means that if the family had stayed on the beach instead of wandering into the woods, they would be getting rescued right now. Teresa decides that she needs to leave the other two and go off on her own to try and find civilization.
I want you to keep that fire going, okay? Because bears are scared of fire.
No, they aren't. In fact, bears who become too acclimated to humans tend to associate fire with humans and therefore with food. But even if that was true, that would mean that they didn't have to leave the beach. All they had to do was keep a fire going, so they were stupid to leave. And since it's not true, that means that Teresa just left an injured man and a teenager alone in the woods with no defense against a bear that this movie desperately wants us to believe is incredibly dangerous. Predictably, Teresa runs into the bear, who startles her, causing her to fall down a hill and knock herself out again. Meanwhile, 2 Coast Guard members get to the boat and use a bullhorn to try and find survivors. Christie hears them, rushes back to the beach, and they're able to rescue her and Robert. This means that Christie, the stereotypical obnoxious teenager, just proved to be more useful than the supposedly brainy Teresa. It's night by the time Teresa comes to, and she seems to be just fine, despite the fact that a head injury bad enough to knock someone out for several hours would leave them severely concussed and probably dead. Not only that, but she was lying there completely helpless for most of the day, and the bear did nothing. That's how dangerous it is. The hunters and Teresa run into the bear at the same time. The hunters want to shoot the bear, but Teresa is in the way, so rather than run behind them, she runs in a random direction. Thanks to her being in the way, the hunters weren't able to fire, and the bear attacks one of them. Sort of. The bear chases after Teresa for no reason, so she tries to hide in the hollow of a large tree. The hunters are finally able to shoot the bear and take Teresa home, where she is reunited with her mother.
Christie? She's great. She said you were amazing.
If by amazing she means completely useless, then yes, Teresa was amazing.
Oh my God, I was so scared out there, Mom. But I had to keep going because they were counting on me. That's courage, honey.
That might be the lamest title tie-in that I have ever seen. The movie ends with Robert's book being a huge success, Teresa being pregnant in a dress that's low-cut enough that several family movie review sites flagged the scene as sexual content, and the 3 generally living happily ever after. If anyone were to base survival decisions on what they saw in this movie, they would die several times over. There is no excuse for writing this sloppy or for getting basic facts this wrong. It's obvious that no one cared about this film. Not the actors, not the bear trainer, and certainly not the writers. But the studio was able to get away with pushing out an inferior product by adding 2 throwaway lines and marketing it to Christian parents. This is a strategy that shouldn't work, but does anyway. And I think there's plenty of evidence to support the theory that this was not originally written as a Christian movie. The main reason I say that is because of Robert's publishers. In the first scene where they're introduced, they actually censor one of them saying the word ass.
Well, maybe if you took your head out of your sometime.
All right.
In the same scene, there's the word hell.
How was I supposed to know they were being less than honest?
And in yet another scene, there's this.
I'll be...
This might seem like nitpicking, but it's significant. Christian parents in particular do not like to hear swear words in their family movies, which is why I think that this film was originally intended for a more general audience, but someone decided in the middle of filming to turn it into a Christian movie and just didn't bother to edit these out. Then there's Teresa's mother. Throughout the film, she's worried sick about her family because she can feel something's wrong. She can sense that something is wrong. She even has a dream about Teresa and Christy being chased by a bear. If the original character wasn't meant to be slightly psychic, she at the very least had heightened intuition, which is not a theme that you generally see in Christian movies because a lot of Christians associate those things with demonic activity. Then, of course, there's Teresa's cleavage at the end, which I didn't even notice on a first viewing, but which was significant enough to enough Christian parents that it generated a flood of comments on Netflix and the aforementioned family movie review sites. In a just world, this movie would have been shown maybe once or twice on some generic cable channel before being entirely forgotten. Instead, 2 throwaway lines of dialogue shoved into the script have given this movie lasting life on DVD as a faith and spirituality film with far too little pushback from Christian audiences. I'm Namio, and if any company with a bad movie to sell can get you on board with this little effort, maybe you should rethink your standards for entertainment.
'Cause it's been fear that ties me down to everything, but it's been love, your love that cuts the strings. So long status quo, I think I just let go. You make me wanna be brave. The way it always was is no longer good enough. You make me wanna be brave.
You want a trout?
Yeah, you got trout. Paw, paw. All right, smile.
If you let your pet run loose, that pet might go find a bear and bring it back and run behind you when it's scared. And good luck with that.